In the podcast Nice White Parents, reporter Hannah Jaffe-Walt, you may know her from This American Life, started looking into this one school in her neighborhood after her kids became school age in New York City. Hannah examines this public middle school, traditionally filled with black and brown students, after a number of white families arrive. And then, not satisfied she fully understood what she was seeing, she went all the way back to the founding of the school in the 1960s, and then up to the present day again. Eventually, Hannah realized she could put a name to what was getting in the way of making the school better all these years. White Parents, Nice White Parents, is a fascinating listen that's deeply relevant today. It's made by Serial Productions, a New York Times company, same people who made the hit podcast Serial and S-Town. All episodes are now available wherever you do get your podcasts. Hello and welcome to 2020 Politics War Room with James Carville in Virginia somewhere, and I'm Al Hunt in Washington. We're proud partners with the Sign Institute at American University. We'll get back there someday. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. James Timothy Wirth has been a major figure in American public life for almost as long as Joe Biden. He was a member of the House, the United States Senate from Colorado for 18 years, high-ranking State Department official, and for years president of the United Nations Foundation. He's now part of an important group called Keep Our Republic, a small collection of former high-ranking administration officials and members of Congress preparing for a chaotic and perhaps deeply dangerous election day and aftermath. Instead of Mr. Ambassador or Senator, let's just say welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Al. Great to be with you again. And James, always a treat.
Thank you, sir. Tell our listeners what Keep Our Republic is worried about and warning about.
A group of, I think 4 or 5 of us got together beginning about 5 months ago, Al, concerned about what we were learning about the election and about some of the president's emergency powers and looking carefully at the Electoral College legislation. We thought that this was really boded in addition to what we thought was going to be Trump's desire to stay in office no matter what. This boded not only chaos, but some real trouble for our republic. So we came together, and members of the group include Dick Gebhardt, you'll remember, and Gary Hart, and 2 or 3 high-ranking people from Treasury and the State Department and elsewhere. And we began to look at the legislation and look at the situation, and we're alarmed in particular by 2 phenomena. One, which very few people know about, the president has vast emergency powers. He can declare an emergency for any number of reasons. These powers started to be granted to the presidency at the time of Eisenhower and the nuclear threat, and it was understandable then to have emergency powers for the president, but they've expanded since, during examinations of chemical warfare and biological warfare, and then, of course, terrorism, and now the pandemic. The president has a whole suite of these powers, which the public knows almost nothing about. The Brennan Center in New York has done the best work on this, but they are largely secret powers. There have been no hearings on them that we know about, that have been ever able to find, and they grant him authority to make all kinds of decisions. Now, just think about that as background for this election and for a president who may feel very threatened and may decide that he has to invoke some of these emergency powers if he is losing or thinks that he has lost. The second part of our concerns were related to the 12th Amendment and the Electoral College. You look at the Electoral College, and it is pretty straightforward in its simplest form. But when you get inside of the Electoral College and begin to examine what happens in each state, you begin to find that there's lots of room in there for mischief. And mischief is maybe a nice word for saying, Dick Gebhardt likes to talk about it being the devil's playground. For example, the election will be held on the 3rd of November. And it's not clear to us that anybody will necessarily be elected then. That the count is going to go on well beyond the 3rd of November, as is now pretty well known, because of all the write-in ballots. If the president is losing in the right, well, let's take it back a step. The president may declare that he is winning because of the ballots that are cast on the same day, and will say, "I won the election," and announce that on the night of the 3rd or the morning of the 4th of November. But in fact, that election margin will dwindle and maybe disappear when the absentee ballots come on. This is the so-called red mirage versus the blue wave. The red mirage of immediate victory, the blue wave coming in with the coming in from absentee ballots. So then that creates a period of time from the 3rd of November into the middle of December, at which time the president can do all kinds of things, and we're worried about many of those, ranging from really encouraging violence in the streets to really pushing on various state delegations, challenging what electors in the various states may decide to do. So we think it's potentially going to be a very chaotic time. And most importantly, in all of this, the public has to be reassured that votes can be counted in a safe way, fully counted, that it's safe to vote and your vote will be counted. We've had challenges to voting in the past. We've had challenges to the system in the past. We can certainly succeed this time around, even though we're hearing a lot of bad things from the administration.
I get what you're saying is that your worry is that the in-person voting in some places may favor Trump, but we know the mail votes are likely to swing it to Biden. And you think that Trump and Barr could even go so far as to try to impound or invalidate mail ballots while claiming victory?
Well, that could be one of the things that they do. Another thing that they might do would be to shut down, get allies in one of the swing states, get the allies in the state legislature in a swing state to invalidate the results and declare their own slate of victors, which would be for Trump, even though the popular vote in that state would be for Biden. And then we get to the time the Electoral College meets in December, and we're really in a mess. And I think it's very likely that there'll be challenges in a number of states by the president if, in fact, they are losing. And he will claim that a lot of these votes were, say, when the blue wave starts to come in, they're invalid. We should count them immediately. They're infected with the virus. They were Chinese votes. I mean, you can imagine a whole variety of statements that he might make to challenge those votes. So I think we're in for a real rodeo, I think, in late November, early December.
You and James can discourse on this, Tim, but if Biden wins decisively in reality, and he carries early states that report mail at the same time as in person, North Carolina and Florida, doesn't that, if not eliminate it, at least mitigate the problem?
No question about it. But I think it's would be foolish of us to believe that everything's okay. When we first started this 4 or 5 months ago, and we were told by pundits and politicos and leadership everywhere, "Oh, you're just exaggerating. Nothing like this can happen," and so on. People are now catching on to the fact that in fact, we may have very, very significant problems, and we better be prepared. We were not prepared in 2000 during the Bush-Gore during the Bush-Gore events in Florida, which went on for, you'll remember, more than a month. I think a review of that record would show that the Democrats had a number of opportunities in which to win that election and didn't, because they didn't know the rules and didn't know what was going on with the kind of care that James Baker and the Republicans did. And they got outfoxed. And we can't allow what we would call whistling past the graveyard. The Democrats are often very good at whistling past the graveyard, ignoring the dangers. We think we have to be prepared. I hope you're right. It'd be great if the election were too big to rig, but I think it's would be a major error for us to count on the fact of the election being too big to rig.
Yeah, hope for the best and prepare for the worst.
That's right.
What is something that he might try before the election? The power that he has that our listeners don't know about.
Well, we haven't. I don't think that it's likely that he's going to exercise these powers before the election. I think that the election is probably going to go ahead, even though he may attempt to send. They have said, the Republican Party has said that they are recruiting 30,000 poll watchers. Now, I don't imagine that those poll watchers are going to be there to help little old ladies across the street. I would suspect that they're going to be there. They're going to be there precinct by precinct, trying to perhaps discourage the vote, challenge votes, and so on. The Democrats have to respond and have said that the Biden campaign has said that it hopes to have a lawyer, at least one lawyer, in every precinct in the swing states. So we're going to maybe have a battle going right through election day as to who is discouraged from voting, whose voting has to be protected, and so on. And we just have to again say over and over and over again, this is going to be okay to tell people, vote. Your vote's going to be safe. And we have to do everything we can to protect and assure that that vote will happen and be fully counted.
Well, just to make you feel a little bit better, I did an event for the Paris County Democrats, and they told me they've had that's Houston. They've had 700 lawyers volunteer to help with ballot issues, anything. I mean, there's so many people around this country that are doing so much on the ground. And I mean, the good thing about your site is you can, tell them what to look for, and, but we're not going to get, my sense is we were asleep in 2016. They're going to try, but we're pretty woke.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear about Paris County. We call this the Peoples Firewall. There are no formal defenses against the president's use of these emergency powers. The Congress doesn't know about them and doesn't have any authority to change them. He can do just about anything he wants, but won't in the face of vast public pressure. And we've seen that. So we call that the People's Firewall. The people of the country have to be alerted and have to be committed to having a fair, full, and fully counted election. That's at every level of government, and that's businesses who certainly don't want to see chaos in the economy and in the country. It's got to be, obviously, all of the political class and the universities, and everybody has got to be thinking about this at every level, and citizens have to be alert and aware as well. So one of the things that we're happy is slowly but surely happening is that the television and so on are slowly but surely catching on to the fact that people have to be alerted and have to be aware of what's happening. And the more that happens, the more pressure there will be, and the less likely that we'll see some kind of a massive effort by the Trump people. I think there'll be limited efforts, and it'll be less effective if we have this major citizens firewall.
You've worked as a senator, a congressman, the UN. How long is it going to take to, the CDC, the WHO, treaties, the Iran treaty, the Paris Accords? How long is it going to take even for Joe Biden to remotely fix this?
Well, I mean, when some are domestic and some are international, we can immediately join WHO and support it again, as we should. And the institution that I headed for a while, the UN Foundation, for example, helped to raise a little over $200 million for WHO because of the budget shortfalls. It's the most important public health agency in the world, and been absolutely maligned in a bad fashion. We can join that right away. We can rejoin the Paris Accords right away. That can be done, and that opening will still be there in January. Related to the Iran nuclear agreement, which was extremely important, the Europeans want to go back to that, and I think that the Russians want to go back to that. It's in everybody's interest to return to a limitation on Iranian nuclear capabilities, and I think Iran wants to do that more than they want to be a rogue without any support from the outside world. So those are things, for example, James, that can be done quickly and well, and I would expect that the Biden administration, which has a very, very deep and experienced foreign policy bench, that they'll be coming back quickly. I think that's almost easier to do than rebuilding the institutions in our own backyard. Under the current administration, the Public Health Service and the FDA and the Public Health and the Center for Disease Control have all been badly compromised and corroded fundamentally by the corruption of this administration. So it's going to take a while to rebuild those. That effort has to go on immediately. The CDC is like WHO. It also sends a lot of staff to WHO around the world, or people from the Center for Disease Control. I mean, it is our domestic. It's the premier public health group in the world, and it is now, I think, pretty shabbily led and thoroughly politicized, and that is absolutely unnecessary. That's been one of the causes of so many people dying in the United States. We have to remember that this administration is to be responsible for just an awful lot of people dying. A friend of mine used to say about Russia, when they talked about various parts of the leadership in Russia, various leaders had, quote, blood up to his elbows. And so I always think about that when I watch those numbers of mortality and deaths in the United States due to COVID. Unnecessary and a terrible, terrible situation, and that's been a public health failure, and mostly a political failure. That has to be rebuilt. That's going to take longer, but I think we have an awful lot of very good public health professionals in the country and in the world. I'm always impressed every time I see a public health officer from one of the states speaking or from one of the big cities speaking. We have a lot of very well-trained people, and they've got to be reorganized, recalibrated, new energy, new direction, and new enthusiasm so they can get back on the job they're so good at.
Tim, let me take you back to James. If it's okay, just let me take you back to these powers, because we've talked to some very high-ranking former Justice Department officials. I suspect some of the people you've talked to. And I guess what they say is, yeah, it's a real danger. It's not so much enumerated powers as what a president is willing to claim. Dick Cheney with John Yoo and Dave Addington, for instance, said in the fight against torture or to torture terrorists, really laws don't apply. That was beyond what was supposed to be legitimate. A more benign example currently, but one that just is kind of astounding, the CDC outlaws evictions. I think that's a good idea, but where did the CDC get that authority? And if you look at that, Tim, Donald Trump might make Dick Cheney look like James Madison and what he's willing to do. And you think Bill Barr would be an enabler, right?
Of course. There are two parts of this. I mean, your question is a very good one, a very important one. Let me just as an aside, we've been working with various parts in the Congress trying to get the Congress to hold hearings on these emergency powers. So far, not with any success. But the public doesn't know anything about this. We are a democratic society, and the president has been ceded or claims vast powers, and it's not discussed. It's so to the two main themes. One is congressional oversight. The Congress is, as you know, from everything from war powers to looking at the emergency powers to spending, has really ceded its authority dramatically, and Trump has taken it. Look at the battle over the wall and the funding of the wall. It used to be when you and I were in this business together at the same time 40 years ago, it used to be that it was very clear that the president proposes, but the Congress disposes. Now the president proposes and the Congress lays down and said, yes, sir, whatever you want us to do. It's a terrible situation and certainly counter to the intent of the founders and to the framework and the way in which the Constitution has worked. In addition, the president claims these vast Article II powers, which may be one of the roots for the unitary authority claims by Bill Barr and his Federalist group of lawyers. The president certainly is enabled by Barr. I can't imagine that during these times when we may have emergencies arising, I can't imagine that the president wouldn't be going to Barr and say, is it legal for me to do this? And Barr would say, yes, sir, of course that's legal for you to do it. So the president would then be claiming this is all legal and would be moving ahead. So again, that's the lack of any kind of control over this, and the Congress has no oversight over it. It's a terrible situation, and we have to get into a situation in 2021 of examining these emergency powers and of examining what the Congress believes its authority is. If we read the Constitution, there are Article 1 authority and Article 2 authority. The Congress is the first branch of government, Article 1. The president has lots of power in Article 2, but it's checked by the Congress. And we've not seen the Congress exercising that responsibility. It's a remarkable story of the lack of backbone somewhere on Capitol Hill, particularly in the Senate, obviously. And that has to be corrected if our democracy is going to survive.
Well, I think I could not agree with you more on that. Let me just, again, a little bit more short term in this potential power grab and illicit activity that Trump might engage in to try to steal this election. You're working with some Republicans, I think, like Tom Ridge.
Yep.
Do you think there are any Republicans who might stand up to this? There have been very few. Mitt Romney stood up to something, Wisconsin State Supreme Court judge last week. But do you think any of these Republicans might get a conscience and cease being enablers?
Well, we have so far, have we? I mean, I think that obviously everybody always mentions Mitt Romney. I think Lisa Murkowski is somebody who's got a conscience, obviously, and she's been very thoughtful about how she votes and how she thinks. And she's chairman now of a major committee, the Energy Committee in the Senate. So that's extremely important. From time to time, you get a positive word from Tom Tillis in North Carolina, although he's up for a very tough re-election this year.
Oh, Tim. Wait a minute. He could go just for a second. Let me interrupt. He was the one that offered and wrote an op-ed about the president could not take funds from the Pentagon and devote them to the war. It said this is a matter of principle. And then the White House, cracked the whip on him, and he caved and voted to let the president do that. I think his backbone is somewhat tepid.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying I'm not listing a lot of backbone. I'm not defining backbone.
No, you're not.
Mitt Romney's the one everybody always speaks about, and it's hard to find otherwise. We have in Colorado, for example, Cory Gardner, the freshman senator there, is up for election this year, is a very talented politician and a very good candidate. And, he has been a 99% supporter of Donald Trump, even in Colorado, which is moving from when it was red when I was first elected to purple, and now it's becoming blue. And I think that, we'll see if he can survive as a skilled politician in the face of a blue wave in Colorado, then we're in for some really deep troubles in various parts of the country, and getting control of the Senate will be really hard.
So I guess I'll look at this like you look at the Civil War. There were three outcomes: that the South could win, or the South could basically tie, and that would have produced peace agreement that would protect. Say the North would win big, would destroy the Confederate Army. Well, the third thing happened, thank God. I think their strategy in the range of this race is a small, that it'll go from a Trump narrow electoral win to Biden by double digits. Okay. At what point, now I understand this is we're just making a fun guess here. At what point do you think it becomes untenable for them to try to, take over these electoral voters?
Okay, well, it's the electoral. You're putting your finger right on the troubling spot, which is the Electoral College and the count of electors. And that goes back, of course, to the swing states. And what's going to happen in Pennsylvania, what's going to happen in Wisconsin, I think are the two most problematic of all of the states. And we may well have conflicts there. We may well have a situation in which, say, Biden wins the popular vote.
But I'm asking a little bit of a different question. Yeah, obviously, if it's close, they'll try it.
Yeah.
All right. Suppose that Biden has carried Florida, but theoretically, we're waiting on. It only works if the election is really, really close to fool around with Michigan or Pennsylvania.
That's right.
Because even them, the public would just go, whew.
Well, I think the public's going to be challenging the result from either side. I suspect they've already, a lot of these militias and the people that Trump is ginning up are gonna, if Biden wins, they're gonna be in the streets in some fashion anyway, and that's what a lot of these poll watchers and so on are going to be doing. I really worry about that. I hope we have a great big win, but I think it's, as I said before, I think it would be terrible of us to think that it's going to be too big to rig, and so we don't have to worry. We have to be prepared, and we have to understand what happens in the Electoral College, what happens in that vote, and the delegations. How does the delegation get chosen in Pennsylvania? How does it get chosen in Wisconsin? Who's influencing that? And then what happens when they all come together in January, which is the big rodeo?
What site should our listeners go to? Do you have a site posted that?
Well, if they go on our website, which is keepourrepublic.com, there's lots of information about where to go. It's Keep Our Republic, one word. You remember Benjamin Franklin at the end of the Constitutional Convention was asked what was created, and he said, "A republic if you can keep it," which is why we name our group Keep Our Republic. It's one word, keepourrepublic.com. There's lots of information there on how to vote, how to be sure to count your vote, what you can do as a citizen, and that we're expanding that all the time. And many people asking just the question you ask, what can I do? And it's terribly important that citizens take action, and it's terribly important that all of us do everything we can to assure that a vote can be counted. Let me note one other thing. Dick Gebhardt has been leading our efforts with the former members of Congress. I don't know if you've dealt with that group, but there are about 200 Republicans and Democrats, absolutely bipartisan effort to make sure that votes are fully counted all the way through, safe and fully counted. And they have launched a campaign called the Patience Campaign to make sure that people are patient, that networks and news people and authorities and so on don't demand an immediate vote, an immediate count on November 3rd or 4th, but understand it's going to take a long while for all these votes to come in. So it's absolutely imperative that we all exercise patience, that we preach patience, that we understand that patience is necessary, and we're not going to be stampeded by whatever kind of violence might occur in the streets or whatever might be said in the White House or by the Attorney General. Patience while all the votes are being counted. And that's a very important nonpartisan or bipartisan effort that is, Leon Panetta's involved in it, and Tom Ridge is involved with it. Mike Chertoff, just a lot of very, very good senior people are involved in this. Former senator from Tennessee, who was the Senate leader, Republican leader, is involved. So they're all working on this patience campaign. So that's a byword as well to keep in mind for you guys all the time and during your podcast. Very welcome to have you on the air doing this, and preaching patience is going to be absolutely essential.
Tim, this is a very important message, and I would, again, all you listeners out there, it's keepourrepublic.com, keepourrepublic.com. It really is important. And Tim Wirth, you're doing great work. Thank you so much for being with us, and you and Ren stay safe.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be with you. Bye-bye.
Joseph Serna is a prize-winning staff writer for the Los Angeles Times and has led the coverage of wildfires that are ravaging the West. Some 5 million acres, I think, have been decimated. Joseph, you and your paper have done a terrific job, and this is a terrible and a very sad story. Give us some idea of the scope of the tragedy. I think the worst fires in California history, the cost, the loss in life.
Yeah, well, it has been a bad year, a decimating year, especially compared to history. Thank you for having me. The scale, it's really hard to grasp for people not in the West and for not in these states. Our digital team has done a good job of trying to illustrate some of this for us. What we've experienced this year would equate to, maybe 6 of downtown LA's burning in 1 year. That's 5,000 buildings over and over and over again burning. More than 5 million acres that you mentioned. It's in the billions. The damage is going to be in the billions. Just 2 years ago, which was the most expensive, destructive year in the world, California led the way. And while we don't have the number of buildings destroyed again this year yet, it's still early in the season. We've lost thousands of homes, displaced tens of thousands of people in just California. When you bring in Oregon and Washington into the West, into that whole picture, like you said, it's almost 5 million acres. It's kind of hard to put your mind around it, but it's going to be a toll that we pay in the immediate sense through FEMA funds, through local funds, but then in the long term, insurance industries, people who lost their jobs, lost their businesses, are going to recover. So these kinds of things have ripples that go on for years, and on this scale, across this amount of people in these 3 states, we're going to be paying for it for a long time.
Joseph, you have California, Washington, Oregon have had to evacuate thousands of people. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of brave firefighters out there working around the clock. And it's all being done in the middle of a pandemic. How much has the COVID affliction affected this effort?
You know, that's a good question. It's really on the logistical side and kind of in the background. That's where you would see COVID play out on the fire lines. When it comes to how firefighters are actually going to go out and do their job of fighting flames with, hose, water, digging containment lines where they, use hose and bulldozers to scrape through the dirt. That stuff has stayed the same because the fundamentals of firefighting do not change. But like I'd said, the logistic sides are different. The way they set up to go fight a fire is different. Their camps where you'd gather hundreds, thousands possibly of firefighters. Those don't really exist in the current form the way they used to, where you'd get these long shower or stalls for showers, chow lines, people sleeping in bunks that are 50 or 60 people. It was a really centralized location. So communication was there, food was there, equipment was there, medical aid was there. That's not happening anymore. It's really more old school, broken up into small parts. So what that requires sometimes is more vehicles. When there's more vehicles on the road, that's an increased risk for firefighters. That also means more costs. And that's on the back end. On the front end, one thing that has changed because of COVID, we wrote about this earlier this year, is the federal government tried to take a more aggressive posture with firefighting this year. Obviously, I don't think anyone anticipated getting this many fires at once, but the plan going in was to be extra aggressive. The federal side, I think Lisa Murkowski had written about this and had called for this from Alaska. Cal Fire, the same thing. They wanted all fires to stay as small as possible by attacking it from the air with helicopters, fixed wing aircraft, dropping retardant. They wanted to keep everything small so they could keep people in their homes and not in evacuation centers, not where they would gather and spread the virus. But in lieu of that, the Red Cross has had to do a larger job of getting people into hotel rooms so they don't gather. That's kind of a long answer for that, but it plays a role in a lot.
Yeah, I can just imagine. I'm going to turn over to James in just a sec, but there are multiple causes of why this is bad, why it's maybe worse than it should be, overcrowding, maybe poor stewardship. But central to this problem, isn't, despite the president's denial, Joseph, is climate change.
Well, I guess we have to define what the problem is, because fire has been around forever. Fire was here before man was here. Fire was here before Europeans settled it. The indigenous people who lived here, they used fire.
It serves a purpose.
Yeah, it does. It serves a purpose. So when we talk about, the problem, it's our problem with fire. And so climate change does play a role in the fact that it sets the table for fire to be easier to live, easier to grow. It's just everybody would have the common sense that when it's hotter, it's easier for things to burn. Just go out to a campfire, go camping on a cool morning where it's moist. Harder to get that fire set than it is on a hot blazing day when it's dry outside. So it plays a role in that regard, but that's not the only issue. And I think other people, have spoken to this, but the wildland urban interface where people move closer into the foothills, into the mountains before you get full on into the forest. Those kinds of developments are expanding. Especially in California, our utility grid, our infrastructure is getting old. It's very old in a lot of places. So that's more vulnerable. The wind events are getting, well, can't say they're getting more extreme yet, but the ones that are extreme are playing a larger role. So it's a really combination of the table is set more often for fire, it seems, because of the heat and the drought. And at the same time, we're getting closer. We're putting humans more on that table where they're more vulnerable to fire. And those are just two of the many elements that go into the predicament ourselves, Oregon and Washington, find ourselves in.
So what the Trump people say, and the conservative radio and television, is, look, they don't want to manage these forests right. The environmentalists won't let them clean out the underbrush like they should do. And if you thin them out, and it's really all the environmental movement that's causing this because of blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Is there some truth to that?
I mean, there is, but it's all a matter, again, of degrees and nuance. And, when I talk to most environmental groups, when I talk to firefighters, there is something to be said for forest management. I mean, the truth is, and the ironic part is, a lot of this is on the federal government. It was the U.S. Forest Service after 1910, which was the Big Burn. If anyone Googles the Big Burn, 1910, 3 million acre fire across 3 states. The world was a lot different then. So for a fire to go across 3 million acres in one shot, it was a different layout back then, especially with the timber industry. But when that happened, it really reset the standards for the Forest Service. They came away with a posture of all fire is bad. It killed a lot of people. And ever since then, the posture was we have to put out fires where they begin. And what that led to was this overgrown forest in a lot of parts of the Sierra and lots of parts of the West. And it wasn't until the last few decades, a couple of generations, where people started to notice that, hey, we're not getting new trees in the forest, new ones to replace these old ones. And they started to revisit how to do it. Anyway, long answer for that question is it plays a role because it is out there. There's an overgrown forest. Most of California's forest is managed by the federal government, by the way. So they do have a significant role in if it's overgrown or not. So it plays a role. It makes fires more extreme. But you can't burn them everywhere. Some of them are just too inaccessible. But again, we're also closer to a lot of these overgrown areas. We're developing in a lot of these overgrown areas. We're running, electrical utilities through these overgrown areas and across these mountains. And we're not always doing the best job of preparing for that in the way we design our towns or our homes. So it's really, there's many sides to that issue. But having an overgrown forest is certainly a part of it, but it is not the cause for it, because again, fires were here before us and they'll be here long after us, as long as we have vegetation.
Well, I was reading this morning that worldwide fires are setting records. I mean, they have fires in Siberia.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually in Australia.
Yeah. So there's a lot of bad forestry management around the world, if you want to believe that.
There's a lot of bad forestry management around the world, and it's also, again, what's going on with the climate and the heat. When I was in Australia, and Siberia is another example of this, I mean, these forests are drought-stricken. They're more dry than they've been in some time, if not ever. And then you just get Mother Nature doing her thing, which is coming through with lightning strikes. And basically just the landscape is primed to burn. It is waiting for something to set it off. And, maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago, if you had 100 lightning strikes, these are just numbers I'm just hypothetically throwing out there. But if you had, a 1 in 20 chance of a lightning strike igniting a forest fire, it's a much greater chance today. The dice are kind of weighted in the favor of starting fires these days. And so Siberia is another good example of that. They've had fires there in the past, but what we're seeing now is things are bigger. Things are spreading faster. And that is, from every expert I talk to, a direct correlation to the fact that our world is warmer and drier.
This is the macro story is awful, 5 million acres, the billions of dollars it costs. But the human story is also, a tragedy. I saw in your paper this morning, Joseph, just a touching story about Berry Creek, California, up in the north, little town of less than 1,000 people. This Syrian immigrant had started he owns a gas station and a convenience store. His young daughter is a reporter for the Chico newspaper. They were the linchpin. They were the centerpiece of that community. All gone. And I don't know how they recover. And there are probably thousands of stories like that.
Oh, there are not probably. There are certainly thousands, tens of thousands of stories like that. And Berry Creek and Butte County overall is a real example of, what a really kind of worst case scenario can be like for a community kind of on the edge, on the leading edge of the impacts of not just climate change again, but a lot of our decisions in California and the West and the way we've built out our state with where we put our people, how we put them there, and how we maintain the land around them. Berry Creek lost, at least, I believe, 15 people. If you combine that with what happened in 2018 in the Camp Fire, which was also in Butte County, you have at least 100 dead in just 2 years and 2 fires in that one county alone. That county, though, and Berry Creek in particular, are indicative or symptomatic of a lot of California. You get these rural homes or these rural places with people, of all political stripes, of all colors, creeds, races. It's just it's California, so it's very diverse. You can't really... It's hard for people to put politics in it because when you go down to these places, I mean, politics don't play a role. Fire doesn't care, and in these places, you're surrounded by forest. You have resilient communities who are self-reliant, and they're vulnerable to fire. And so what you saw in Berry Creek, and we covered this, was when they were told to evacuate, they were given 7 hours to evacuate in some places. Not everybody got the evacuations, but those who did had to make a choice. And many leave, and many did leave because of the Camp Fire 2 years ago, but some didn't, either by choice or because they couldn't. And so people died. And that's what happened 2 years ago. People died. And it's going to happen again, and it's terrible.
How long does this fire season last?
Well, it started earlier. It's usually in Southern California. Well, we're talking with Northern California. So if we stick with Northern California, that fire season actually usually begins in like June or July, and it's supposed to be calming down about this time. But now our fire season is I would almost say year round. I mean, we haven't had major fires in January, February, March, April for some time, and I've been covering fires here for the Times since 2013. We haven't had major fires then, but 2018 we had big fires in July. In 2017 we had fires in December. So really, there's only like a few months where we're not sitting by our desks wondering if there's a fire, or where these communities are sitting there vulnerable, wondering if there could be a fire there. It's a lot longer than it used to be. And that just has cascading effects for the way that people live their lives and what it costs the state to be there.
Well, Joseph, we really appreciate all of our listeners out there. If you're interested in this vitally important but tragic story, read the LA Times and look at that story about that Syrian immigrant and the little gas station and convenience store in Berry Creek, because it just breaks your heart. I hope some people will help that family. Joseph, you're doing a terrific job under very trying circumstances. Thank you so much for enlightening us today.
Yeah, thank you, man. You really, know your subject matter. Wow.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
Oh, wow, James. You suffer down in the bayou down in New Orleans with hurricanes. There's fires out in California. It's just a lot of tough stuff. And the hurricane has already hit Mobile. You're going to avoid it this time, but
yeah, kind of Alabama and Northwest Florida. But the problem is it's moving at 2 miles an hour. And it's going to just dump water everywhere. A lot of water get dumped in Alabama, Georgia. It's a slow moving storm, and that's the problem. These storms move slow and they're wetter.
James, before we go, I thought Tim Wirth was really interesting today, and Joseph Serna really, really enlightened me about that fires. Joseph, of course, is with the LA Times, and it's keepourrepublic.com for Tim Wirth's group. Let's just spend a couple minutes on politics before we go. You and I both hear from friends who say, "Oh my God, this race is tightening. Oh wow, I'm worried. I saw some survey." Looking over everything, there's no indications that this race is really tightening.
No, and people call me and everything so much they actually start scaring me, and then I just go back and say, "What are you afraid of?" I mean, everything we have now, and that thing he did last night. I hope more people watch that. He doesn't he doesn't relate to voters.
Well, who was it? Michael Cohen or someone said he really doesn't like these people. I mean, he doesn't. He has contempt for them. He plays.
No, Howard Stern, because he hates his own people.
He does. But, on this, I went, and NPR had a piece about 4 or 5 days ago. Minnesota is in play. And Corey Lewandowski said, you watch, we're going to win Minnesota. And there were Republicans who said, yeah, we might lose one or two that he won, but Minnesota is at the top of it. Well, I know ABC poll, which is a perfectly credible poll, came out today with a 16-point lead for Biden. Now, I think that's probably exaggerated, but 3 others have an 8 or 9-point lead. I just don't see what's changed to Trump's benefit in the last 3 or 4 weeks.
They are so depressed and are so desperate for a story. And the Democrats so climb on to any bad news story. So if they put a story like that up there, everybody's going on it, because the Republicans are going to say, ha ha, look at it, we're coming back. And the Democrats go, oh my God, it's 2016 all over again. And you're going to see the same thing's going to happen in Nevada. But anything that they say that'll make it more competitive, where you get one poll. Remember the Monmouth poll in Pennsylvania was up 3. And everybody went, I said, of course, you have the Monmouth poll that just came out in Florida.
Was it Monmouth or Susquehanna? But whatever it was,
yeah,
you're
it was
right.
Susquehanna. I'm sorry, it wasn't Monmouth. I stand corrected. Yeah. Thank you. So the Monmouth comes out showing it 5 points in Florida. And everybody kept saying Florida's slipping away. No. And you're just going to get variation on some of these polls, but Monmouth is one of the better of those nationwide polls. So
right, you and I both remember we got both. I think had a reaction from people. There was a headline about a week ago for this was the Marquette Law poll.
It's a good poll.
Which is a good poll, which said Biden lead in Wisconsin is slipping to 4 points. Well, when you look at the poll, and Milwaukee Journal covered this correctly, it was 49-44 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was 47-43. That ain't slipping. That's stability. That's staying the same.
Right. And just so our listeners understand, when you see these numbers, they're rounded numbers. So you could be ahead, you could have 45.4 and somebody has 44.6. That's going to get reported at 45. So, I mean, some of these one, I don't know if this is the case in this poll, but some of it can be a rounding error. And it's just hard for polling. That kind of consistency probably tells you where it is now, which is you're up 5, and state that undecided don't generally break for you.
Well, I'd make one more point, which I hear from some Democratic friends. This has been a absolutely horrible 2 weeks for Trump. Between Bob Woodward's revelations, your Senator John Kennedy said that's just a gotcha book. I'm sorry, Senator Kennedy. That was an interview with the president. That's his own words. And Jeffrey Goldberg's totally credible story about him calling slain military heroes losers. It's been terrible, and he doesn't seem to have had much effect. Well, that may be true, but it may be cumulative. But on the other hand, if he does something supposedly big or good, like that, what I think is largely overhyped and semi-phony Mideast peace conference at the White House the other day, that's not going to help him either. He's just rock he's just rock solid at a low point.
And, this is as of right now. There's a lot of events that are coming up in this campaign. But, people, mentally, I don't know if some of these people can make it to election day. People are just so nervous and just glom on to any piece of bad news they can find. And, when people say the star, it doesn't have an effect, and Woodward comes out, it's going to have an effect. It's going to add up to 100 on election day. And right now, I would describe myself as, but I would love for this election to be tomorrow. It'd be a blowout. I mean, you could just see it.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. And also, it would be 47 more days that we don't have to worry and go through any kind of anguish. Each 47 days, I haven't translated that into hours. It's probably over 1,000 hours. Each day, James, seems like a decade. I mean, it just
like a week.
It does not go easily.
No.
But we had another good show today, and we're going to have a special show on Friday. We're going to have it actually may air Saturday, but late Friday or early Saturday. James Fallows, who I think may be one of the most important public and journalistic intellectuals of our times, has written a piece on how the media is handling this election and perhaps repeating some of the same mistakes made in 2016. And we talk to Jim and Deb Fallows. It is always a fascinating and insightful conversation. So this will be another special this week, and we're looking forward to it. And I let me just say to everybody out there, I want to thank you for listening to 2020 Politics War Room. Follow the show on Twitter at Politics War Room. Email us, politicswarroom@gmail.com. That's politicswarroom@gmail.com. Thank you for subscribing. Please rate the show with a 5-star review. And we'll be back next week as we count down 47 days to go in an election that really, this is no longer a cliche, the most important of our lifetime. So please vote early, be well. James, be safe, and we'll be back in 48 hours.
Good deal, man.